Behind the men and women who serve our country are fearless leaders who live in the shadows. They stay up late nights praying, worrying, and waiting for phone calls, filling out mountains of paperwork, and keeping research folders on experimental services. But more importantly, they patiently love our heroes back together again. Welcome to your community. No matter what stage you're at, we're here to provide expert resources, faithful support, and real-life insight into how you can move from managing to living your best life. Your hosts, Libby Bates and Erin McCauley, found one another in opposite sides of the country in different stages, but with a common struggle. Together, with outside guests and experts, we'll open the resources and support you need. Let's get to the episode. Hey, listeners. Thanks for tuning in and sticking with us. We appreciate you being here today. We're going to talk about suicide and how it affects the family members. We're joined by Elizabeth Wells. Thanks for being here, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I feel I'm excited that you're here too. And listeners, we met Elizabeth from Sean Moore at Caregivers on the Homefront. And we had a nice talk with her last week. And then she said, hey, you know what? I know this other lady, and I think she needs to talk to you. And this is really how our community has grown. And really, it's growing outside of just speaking to spouses, which I think is really important, because while it is really important that we support military spouses, I think it's also really important that we know that there's a lot of single people out there that don't have a spouse, or they have a lot of times a spouse that's in the service currently, which means that they're going to need a little bit more of a tribe. They're going to need a little bit more help. I think that's important too. And then parents, siblings, which I love that Elizabeth is here because Elizabeth is a sibling. We'll get into her story in a little bit, but I think it's really important that siblings of disabled veterans understand what they're going through, because spouses really, our whole entire life was never meant to just be with the spouse anyways. We were meant to have friends, and we have family and extended family, at least most of us do. And for those of us that don't have those healthy families, you really can start to see a difference in the veteran. I would say that's one of the big differentiators that we see a lot of times with people who are struggling. One of the first questions is, what does your support system look like? And it's not just the spouse that they're asking about, because siblings and parents and cousins and family friends, you guys can all make a huge impact and a huge difference in a veteran's life. So I think it's awesome that you're here.
I appreciate it. I'm really excited. I'm grateful for the platform, because I think honoring a deceased loved one is part of the healing process. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Would you like to share your story with our listeners?
Absolutely, yes. So my name is Elizabeth. My friends call me Liz. My brother Murphy took his life when he was 31. He was a sergeant in the United States Army, but he was awarded staff sergeant posthumously. But he served a tour in Afghanistan in 2012 as the station chief for the 750th Engineering Detachment. He was my only sibling. So after having lost my brother, I remember shortly after receiving that phone call, I just remember thinking, man, I'm going to bury my parents alone. Like, this is the person that was supposed to know me the longest. And you read these Hallmark card bumper sticker kind of sayings where it's your siblings there when you're brought into this life. And typically they last throughout the majority. And so I felt quite cheated of just such an amazing experience with such a wonderful man. But Murphy left for Afghanistan as one person. And it would be very naive and ignorant of me to say he returned as the same person. Now, I am very fortunate to have a background in healthcare. I have a master's in nursing, and I'm currently an emergency room nurse at Liberty Hospital, which is in Liberty, Missouri. And I love them. They've been a godsend to me as far as an organization. And I really enjoy my job. Can empathize in certain ways with my brother in terms of being a trauma nurse and being the front line for a form of first responder. But it was most alarming to me that even with the education that I was provided, with the knowledge and experience that I had, how much I missed. And the ER receives, and I'm sure we'll be able to get into this later and I can expand more, but we receive pretty much any psychiatric patient that needs to go inpatient, either veteran or civilian, will actually come through the ER. Very rarely are they directly admitted because a lot of times they'll come in like an acute state of psychosis or suicidal ideation or attempt, et cetera. So it's all encompassing. So he came back, was struggling significantly. And I, even being the person that I am with the tools that I had, was extremely unprepared. And I think that is a motivating factor for me to start to really commit myself to awareness and really diving headfirst into organizations like Caregivers on the Home Front, because not only do I see how ill-prepared we are to support these women and men, but how ill-prepared we are to support ourselves.
What kind of tools were you able to utilize to be able to help?
So tools like for our grieving purposes. Mm-hmm. So I was actually driving over here and I was thinking about that being one of the trickier of the questions. And I could go into the obvious, and I don't want to minimalize it by saying obvious, but the importance of group therapy, the importance of suicidal support groups, the importance of reaching out and being open to medications like SSRIs or medication to help you sleep, talking with friends, meditation, physical activity. I think that those kind of speak for themselves. So the one point that I wanted to drive home the most, and I've unfortunately paid a dear price for, is protect your pain. And when I say that, I mean that when you lose someone special to you, it's difficult in and of itself. When you lose someone to suicide, the compounding factors can be so weary and so draining that you can easily trust the wrong people with your story. And I had a lot of trauma bonding after my brother, and I reached out to people who were able to step into my pain, were able to hold space for me. And then I trusted people who were unable to. And so I really want to stress just discerning the difference. And it doesn't seem fair, right? Because we imagine that people in our life are there to benefit us and support us and be there for us. And God forbid, we don't have the strength to put on our pants and deodorant. How are we supposed to have the strength to discern who we can let into this vulnerable space? So that's what I really wanted to focus on, is protecting your pain, making sure that this person is reliable, that this person knows how to not only hold space for you, but are willing to look under the hood of their own car. Because my experience shows that when you let somebody into your suicide story, it's multifactorial. So if I'm going to say this is what happened to my brother, we're probably going to get into what my childhood looked like. We're probably going to get into the dynamic of my brother and I struggled with and these ancient generational wounds. And you can't tell a single sentenced story, if you will, about suicide. If you're going to let somebody in, they see the whole picture. And there are people that are wonderful support systems that will cry with you. And there will be a real form of intimacy, either as friends, as family, or as an intimate partner. But then there will be also other people that will weaponize your pain. And I know that I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but we have to be very conscientious of who we trust with our story. So that's the biggest point I wanted to drive home. All the other things, super important. I know that I got into a grief counselor. My mom, my brother's wife at the time, and myself all got into grief therapy. We also had our own individual therapist. I highly encouraged my mom to consider a mild SSRI, to which she struggled. But then we got in this conversation. This is why we are where we are to begin with in society, is because of stigmatization. And then I believe it's extreme. It's a little extreme, but I actually took off to India 3 months after my brother died. For this first 3 months, made sure that my mom wasn't going anywhere, literally and emotionally, that Gretchen, his widowed wife, was taken care of, that his belongings were sold, that his debts were paid, that his body was buried. And for those 3 months, I compartmentalized everything. I would work a 12-hour shift. I would come home, dust window panes, scrub the floor in my hands and knees. I couldn't sleep. I struggled. Even with the tools I had, it was very difficult. What happened is when that acute phase was over and I felt that I could open the door safely and look at my pain, I actually left for India and I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat in the Himalayas, which is something that I mean, like, this is not something I would say this is an extreme, but I was single, I was able to do that, but you can find your own meditation retreat in gardening and coffee with your best friend in these wonderful weekend retreats that Caregiver on the Homefront provides, to where people can come and really be just encompassed with support. There's so many avenues and they all are equally important. But yeah, protect your pain, ladies and gentlemen, because not everybody out there has good intentions.
I like what you said about being able to, I forgot the first little snippet of it, but when you said that they're willing to be with you, but also willing to look under their own hood as well. And it's really hard to talk to family about problems a lot of the times, I think, unless you come from one of those open families, which I don't know how common that is. You might know as an ER nurse, or maybe you don't see a lot of those family members. I don't know how to say it, but it's almost like nobody wants to be the person that talks about it. But that's why stigma's there, and it can even happen within family. So I like that you say that you have to protect your story. And I think it's important too, that if you don't have someone in your circle, that you find someone at least to talk to, even if they're not in your circle. And that's good with a counselor, I think. But also, I like the group ideas too. But I think it's important, like you talked about, trauma bonding. That's another thing that is a newer statement that I've heard, but really makes up a good majority of a lot of people's lives when you really think about it, of how much what we call social activity is trauma bonding, like it's unhealthy. You'll see a lot of that. And that's why too, you'll get people who don't want to talk to their friends about issues. And it's like, this person's your friend. And I felt like that in my own life. And it is nice to find someone like Libby that is, you can make this agreement, you make a pact with this person that this is going to be a healthy relationship and we're going to talk through things. But it seems so simple, but yet it's apparently so rare.
It is. I feel yeah, I agree with you. It's like this stain on the shirt that everybody's trying to like tuck into their belt. So like,
yes, but we're trying to pay attention to two different things at the same time, and it doesn't work. You can't have these issues that are just normal parts of life. If you really go, and my husband, I know, talked about this after he got back, because he had PTSD and still does. And he had talked about he didn't really understand why these things bothered him. And I finally just told him, and you've been through a lot. Like, you add up everything that's gone through. Like, if you were just smooth sailing, not a problem, I would be concerned at that point. Like, it is normal human behavior to have these emotions. And I think it's important that we normalize human behavior, because human behavior is normal. And then we can go somewhere. But if we don't even define where we are, how are you going to get anywhere? Mm-hmm. You don't know where to go.
Yeah, you're running into a wall. And I think
you're just doing what everybody else is doing at that point.
Yes.
And which is going to be based off of what environment you're in at that current moment. So how does the family do a better job recognizing these issues?
That's a great question. And I'm asked that frequently as a medical professional as well. And the first thing that I'll do when I'm asked by a tearful mom or a scared husband in the waiting room as their loved one's being processed and we're evaluating them is, first and foremost, what I had to absolutely understand about a loved one progressing to a point in which they would take their own life is that it's so close. They're so close to you that I almost imagine it like somebody holding up a piece of paper with a password written on it, but they're putting it on the tip of your nose and they're asking you to read it. My mom's a nurse. My dad is a nurse. My stepmom is a nurse practitioner. I am a nurse. My dad was specifically a psych nurse. And so I just want to offer compassion to anybody who's listening that feels that they don't have tools, that have lost a loved one and are possibly holding some kind of guilt or shame that they were not given the tools that they needed. We had a family of medical professionals and we could not see it. And I think that goes back to just this really intrinsic kind of human ignorance that we all carry around, like, but it would never happen to me. Not my family, not my brother. He's just having a hard time. He's just losing 40 pounds. He's just not calling back. He just looks like he's ill all the time. He's just not eating. He's just overcompensating on substances and not communicating, but not me. It could never happen to me. And I think that the most humbling thing that I've experienced is I am not unique in the sense that suicide has and may even in the future continue to touch my life, that this is the world that we live in, but offer compassion to those families that feel somehow responsible for what has happened or ill-equipped. It is a natural human response to doubt that your life could be put into such shambles. And then once you can touch base and have that be the foundation that you learn on, then it's community activism like what we're doing right now, where it's like, all right, well, let's talk about the signs and symptoms. Let's have a conference, or let's go speak to high school and grade schools and say, hey, this is what you may commonly see. The tools that I wish we had was communication. I wish that the familial aspect would have been able to communicate better with the military aspect. After my brother took his life, obviously we all came together to mourn his loss. And I figured out that we all had the same concerns. We all felt equally helpless. They didn't know how to get a hold of us. We didn't know how to get a hold of them. They didn't know what they could share. So lack of communication is a big one. I think that if we had better tools in communicating with other aspects of Murphy's life, if we had people that, and this kind of bleeds into breaking the stigma, but if we could break down this stigma more and make it more readily available for his loved ones, his buddies, his fellow veterans to give me a call, give my mom a call, give the commander a call. Hey, I'm concerned. And looking back, I know that there are several of those gentlemen who did anything and everything they could. And that kind of brings us down a different road, as there's a system, I'm sure, that's equally faulty on the military side. But communication was a big thing that fell through. And also having a place to where we could go to gather our thoughts to make sure that what we were thinking was correlating to what reality was. Caregiver on the home front, a lot of these people have not lost their veterans. They're caregivers as of now, currently. And had those been more readily available, had I been able to contact them, hey, what was your husband doing before that? How'd you break through to him? How did he communicate? Did he stop eating? Did he start drinking more? Did he start lying? Was there manic behavior? The lack of community, the lack of communication, but also this inherent kind of naive blinders I put on, even as a medical professional. It just couldn't happen to my brother. And I think that's devastating to have to deal with.
I think that we, a lot of times, I don't know if it's our psyche, but I don't know which part of this in us does this, but it's like, if I look at it, then it's there. So the easiest
Let's pretend
way,
like it's not happening.
Yeah. So let me just look over here, because then maybe I don't know if we hope it'll fix it. Or a lot of times I think we feel it's a really difficult conversation to have. And it can be a strange conversation depending on the person that you're having it with as far as relationships go. I think a lot of people just steer clear from it because they don't know what to say. And they think that's what the medical professionals are for, but not everybody goes to medical professionals because they need help. A lot of people try to steer clear of the medical system, especially in COVID. They don't want to go to the ER. There's family that are left and friends. And I think it's not that far of a conversation from a lot of people's minds. So it shouldn't be that difficult of a conversation to have. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Because there's a large percentage of people that have reported at least having at one point in time depression or suicidal ideation. And these are just the numbers that were polled. So then you go out and you multiply that. Apparently there's people that have had these feelings, but they don't even know how to articulate them, maybe to help themselves so they don't feel comfortable helping another person. I don't know what it is. I personally feel better if I know a person is there with me that has gone through that, and then we can help and bounce off of each other and find ideas. But if you can't even discuss it,
it's like, how do you I think opening that door requires
vulnerability.
Exactly. It requires the willingness for somebody to step into someone else's pain. Yeah. And it comes down to Like, it comes down to courage in my mind. And by no means are people who don't have the tools to do that have a lack of courage, but it's a courageous act to step into someone's pain. And that's why my fear is if, go to a grade school or high school and I say, hey, these are the 5 signs, giving away valuables or lack of hygiene. Okay, that's great. But okay, so now we see them. And so now we know what's going on. So now we just walk around them and we avoid it, right? He's got the 5 signs and symptoms. Like, I'm going to hurry up and get her. And so it's really not as much recognizing it as it is teaching people to have the courage to step into someone else's pain, to be able to stand there and really feel the humanity of what that looks like for somebody who does not know if they want to live any longer. And that, I feel like that is where we have to change on a foundational level. That's where emotional intelligence comes into play. That's where learning about true intimacy and intimacy. It's very cheesy. That's how I keep it in my head. And it's not just in romantic relationships by any means. We have to be willing to see the person for this imperfect entity that they are. And then we somehow are going to be involved in the responsibility of alleviating that. And so I think it comes down to this foundational ability to show up for another human being.
Yeah, just show up. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It brought me back to the point that you said the other day, Erin, is sometimes people just don't know how to show up for people. They don't know how to show up.
I would say, though, that this rings true. I would venture to say 99.9% of the time, because if you have somebody, especially a family that goes through that type of a loss, and then you have a grief process that is very complex. It's not just somebody passed away. It's the guilt that comes along with that. And I really think that my advice there would be the pain of regret is going to be bigger than your pain of learning how to have a conversation or just doing it. Because I would venture to say, if you could go back and text your brother 1,000,000 times something different about not even asking him if he was okay, just telling him how much you loved him and how important he was and how you value his presence. But who thinks to do those things all of the time? But that's every story I've heard and every story I've experienced is, and so you're going to have pain either way. And sometimes I think it's also important to realize, and I'm a survivor of suicide attempts, so I think it's important that I can say on the other side that I don't think it's always that person isn't thinking clearly. And so I think that guilt is a lot of times misplaced and displaced because we don't know what to do with it. And I think it's almost human nature to make it about us in some manner because that's something that we can control. But at the same token, there's that place where we all meet, but nobody wants to be the silly person. Even I feel silly sometimes with my husband, and he's high risk as far as suicidal ideations go. I do feel silly sometimes saying every day, like, hey,
how are you feeling? Are you doing okay?
Yeah. And those kinds of, you sometimes feel like, well, am I over talking about it? Because you don't want to do that either. But that's where you just allow that person to say, hey, I'm doing great and I'm going to reach out to you. But you can also have valid talks. What have you been learning? It's okay to have accountability in relationships too. But this is all seems so brand new to us because we should all just be like, hey,
tuning into everybody's stuff.
Yeah. So anyways, this is really leads into our next question. How do we get people to focus on themselves? Because that's a lot of times my issue is I focus on other people to a point that then I'll lose myself. But then you also feel selfish at times focusing on yourself. So can you give us an idea of what that looks like in a healthy way?
Yeah. And I'm going to try because it's definitely something I struggle with myself. So,
that's the beauty of this vulnerability in this discussion, though, because you're with 2 other women that feel it. So, and with a lot of other listeners that feel that too.
I think I would be lying if I said that I was taught as a young child or as an adolescent or even as a young woman, self-worth, self-value. I think that especially as women, we fall into a very interesting category where, God forbid, we give ourselves a compliment, right? God forbid, we like our haircut, let alone we invest in ourselves, either financially or emotionally or mentally, physically, hopefully all of the above. But for me, what I would have liked to have seen is, I think, had my family and Murphy's relationships, if they had been better taking care of themselves, I think there would have been a waterfall effect in terms of, I think he would have had some free energy to take care of himself. I think that it's almost that kind of snake eating its tail, right? So codependent relationship, I'm going to take care of you, you're going to take care of me. But God forbid, if we only knew the answer was we took care of each other and we could show up better for one another. But I think that the way that we encourage people to invest in themselves is, number one, let them know the resources that are available, that these are options for you. For example, a caregiver on the home front this month, we're doing a poker tournament. And so it seems, yeah, okay, we're going to have some food and play some poker, but it's creating community, but it's also letting veterans know, like we talked about when we first initially met, and we were talking about your husband, if people knew, if they just scheduled a lunch, a game of golf every 6 months with these veterans, if they just let them know that there was consistency in their relationships, if there was more community organized venues or events that showed up for veterans that made them feel normalized, I think the more integrated into society they feel, the more motivated they're going to be to remain part of that society. So if we open up a dialogue and have men discussing things, oh my gosh, God forbid, as far as emotions or regret or trauma or sadness or guilt, and especially shame is the most dangerous of all emotion, then I think if we could introduce that mind frame, then they would be so driven via human connection and getting their needs met in that way to better care for themselves and participate. So it's letting them know that there's resources out there, that there's places that they can go, and that they're inherently flawed, but they're so loved. And a way to do that is like you said, hey, I love you. You're my brother or my husband or my sister or my mother. And for this relationship to function successfully and healthfully, for me to go to work as a nurse and pay attention to my patients and give good patient care and focus on my friendships when I'm out having a margarita, I'm going to ask you every day in the morning, I'm going to give you a kiss and I'm going to say, where are we today? How are we feeling today? And when I come to you, I'm not trying to mother you. I'm not trying to get in your business. I'm trying to allow there to be enough of a dialogue, enough of a consistency in our relationship that we're giving each other freedom to be present in our moments when we're separate from one another by staying in check with each other. Where are we at? How are you feeling? And this is going to become, it might not be Susie and Bob's normal next door, but that's okay. Nobody likes normal anyway. This is going to be our normal. In the mornings, how are you? Where are you? Where are we at? How are you feeling? What can we do better? And really break down that stigma that we're, like you said, that we feel like we're that weird guy. We're that weird guy that's showing up and everybody just wants to have a drink and play volleyball. And you're over here pulling the guy to the side. Like, hey, no, let's really talk about that. I think being that weird guy is being that courageous guy. So making sure that guy's got an in as well, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. I like what you said too about consistency in relationship. There are many veterans with traumatic brain injuries, and I think it's really important that consistency really in anything, or knowing that there might be a shift or change, is really important because they perceive things a bit differently than people who do not have these brain injuries. And I think that it's really important that people choose to be friends with veterans, but also realize that consistency in relationship is so much more important. And I think a lot of times people don't feel like they're making a difference. That is one of the number one things. They just think, oh, I just took this guy to lunch, or, oh, what is the big deal? We go play golf once every 6 months. But it's actually not just a huge deal, it's a massive deal. Sometimes it's the difference between having suicidal ideations and not having suicidal ideations, which is a big deal. It takes a lot of time to recover from those, to bounce back emotionally and mentally, where you're then on a level playing field enough to go meet new people to go replace the people that were inconsistent. Like, this is a lot for a person who has a very low brain capacity to understand. And we forget that's what the brain does, is really help you navigate a lot of your internal emotions and the way that you feel. And if that is damaged, you are going to struggle. So the more hands on deck, the better off. But those hands are important. We need hands that are here to do good things.
Yeah, and people
and not they don't need to be babied. I think that's probably the other big thing is they don't want to be babied. If you even get outside of the veteran community, just into the regular mental health community, the biggest problem that you see, people stop taking their medicine and they just want to feel normal. And that is, normal is relative. That's not a word. Nobody walks around and has no anxieties. Nobody walks around and never, ever thinks about themselves. That's something we all have in common. And mentally ill or not mentally ill, there's things going through our head, things that we're struggling with, things that are conflict in our life. And they're all different for each person. But I think the expectation sometimes for people who are mentally ill is that we're going to unmentally ill and then not have any problems at all, which is completely unrealistic.
Right.
And then, so that's how I feel about that.
Hey, sign me up for the unmentally ill thing. That would be sweet. Okay. I would love to be unmentally ill. At least in my lifetime.
But I think to me, it's just a starting point, and for a lot of people, because you're still going to be alive. You have to learn to manage this. You have to learn how to get better. You've got to learn how to minimize this in your life, but to do that in a way that is healthy. And there are many ways to do that, but it's not an instant fix. Nobody gets outside of a traumatic incident. That will, like, as far as PTSD, yes, you can get mentally ill in a second. You can't get unmentally ill in a second. It doesn't work like that. It's like a broken bone. You have to let it over time, and you have to give it special care and special attention. And if you have incident after incident, that is going to compound time. Maybe you're spending 30% of your day, quote unquote, getting better, but really you're just managing chronic disease and chronic stress.
It's almost, you have the fad diet, and then you just have that person on this, dude, let's just start walking every day. Let's just start hanging out, and like our kids can play soccer in the park and we'll get our steps. It's about lifestyle change. You can only do so much in an acute care setting. And that's what we do in the medical field is we can provide you with medication. We can get you stabilized on those medications, but then it's going to just kick you to the curb. And I don't believe it's intentional. I think a lot of it's probably interwoven into insurance and finances, like everything in life, but it's a lifestyle change. And that's why I really appreciate what you said. We've been building off of this idea of consistency. It's if we want somebody to value themselves and we want somebody to invest in themselves, then we need them to know that they're worthy of investing in. And I can't sit there and say, hey, you didn't see that child die. Hey, you didn't see that veteran blown to pieces. And I'm sorry, trigger warning. I don't mean to get too elaborate, but like you can't say, hey, you didn't see and experience these things. What you can say is, I can't imagine what you've gone through. I bet it's extremely isolating. I want to know. I want to sit in this with you. I want you to educate me if that's something you want to do. But also, these are my pains. This is what I carry. This is what was happening back home for me. And this is the shame that I inherently feel being a human on the face of this planet. And it might not be as big or as bold, but you are just as worthy as anyone else to receive that support. And they need to know that the burdens that they carry, as heavy as they are, not foreign to those who walk around them, because it's so isolating to them. And then they have to hide. And when they hide, anytime you hide, what you're saying is, at the core of me, there's something so foreign, something so fractured and broken that I have to build up walls around it. And that's where isolation comes from. And inevitably, lack of social support inability to see the future, that is when people pull the trigger figuratively and actually. And like you said, it's consistency. It's showing up on a regular basis. It's having these programs. It's educating the community. But really, it's just admitting that we have this epidemic of mental health happening in the world right now. And there's so many contributing factors that we could be on this for hours, as far as the stigmatization of mental illness, all the way to subliminal messaging, to social media, to the cancel culture. I recently was unfortunately played a role in what it feels like to be societally shamed. This is what puts people in the mindset that they have no hope for connection. And it's showing your wounds to a veteran who you have discerned can be somebody who can handle those would probably be the greatest gift you can give to them, is that they're not alone, that you too struggle. Like you said, there's nobody walking around without insecurities, without fears, without anxieties. And I would be very surprised to say that if we all sat down without a therapist, I'm sure we all got a diagnosis waiting for us. I know for a fact. I'm over here like, what's up? I'm sure there's something else you could sprinkle on there. Just depends on how much time we got.
So you're an ER nurse. So when
Yes.
somebody walks into the ER, what kind of support systems are in place for, say, family members of people that have completed suicide? Are there support systems in place right now currently?
Maybe it just depends on the state, but
it's going to be a sad response, but no, there really aren't. And it doesn't mean that there aren't nurses and physicians that are working their tails, and social workers that are working their tails off trying to be present. But really the reality of what it looks like for family members is because of the policies and procedures in place, at least with my personal experience, when somebody comes in with suicidal ideations, no family members are allowed back. Typically we do something called medically clear them. And so we take baseline blood work and urine, make sure that their organ systems are all in tune, that we're working well physically, that there isn't something that we need to address that's imminent, threatening them. And then once they're medically cleared, we have a professional come in and do a psychiatric evaluation. And the family is not unfortunately involved in any of this, most of which is because it can be triggering, but also because the questions are personal. And a lot of times the patients are, like I said, we have patients come in with psychotic breaks, manic behavior, dissociative identity disorder. They're hearing auditory and visual hallucination commands. So it's safer that the family is disconnected during this assessment period. The problem is that we're so inundated with psychiatric patients that we have such a lack of resources right now as far as manpower because of COVID, because of burnout rates of medical professionals, because of what we're calling, I think, they're compassion fatigue. We don't have the men on the ground that we need to accurately and adequately communicate with the family members on the outside. So really, your husband overdoses or, God forbid, something else, and the ambulance pulls away, good luck if you get a phone call. And that's just the reality. And it's unbearable to admit. And it's really unacceptable. But it is the world that we live in. And it is what needs to dramatically change, because it isolates the family members. It creates a dynamic of punishment, of a feeling of being held like maybe I'm accountable, maybe I'm the bad guy here. And I think that the frontline workers are so goal oriented and goal driven to reverse whatever toxic substance or, God forbid, wound that this person has inflicted, that the family members just got the window. And until we find placement, or the family member is contacted simply because they're the durable power of attorney or advanced healthcare directive holder, or they call us, there's really no communication. And I, sadly enough, will admit that we have got many people that have came in with failed suicide attempts or suicidal ideations where we don't speak to one family member. And it's kind of like, well, I hope they know where you're going. I hope you know, and it's not that we don't try. It's just that the system is so fractured. There's so much room for improvement. The issue with the emergency room is it's such an acute care setting, and we're so inundated with such sick patients that the social aspect of it, right, the community aspect, the support system aspect is just unfortunately put on the back burner. And I believe with my travel nursing experience, that is nationwide.
My dad is a funeral director, and when he would get suicide cases, which are always awful funerals, and they're horrible funerals because they're so sad. I remember one of the first funerals he had was a veteran. And I remember that it surprised me because I don't remember how old I was, but I wasn't fully grown. But I wasn't too little of a kid to not understand. And I remember I just asked, it didn't make any sense to me why a veteran would want to take his own life. Like that it made absolutely no sense to me at 11 or 12 years old. And I think my dad had told me that he had Desert Storm syndrome. And so he had the neurological breakdown. I think that a lot of times we forget that it's not always, it's still mental health related, but a lot of times it's an end to chronic disease or pain, which is it's a totally different ball game, but it is still a very prevalent number. I guess you only really find out by the note that they leave. Or I had a relative that committed suicide, and he literally just left a note that his wife had died, and he was an elderly man, and I think he was a veteran too, and his wife and caregiver of several years, decades, passed away, and then he didn't want to live in that pain anymore, and that was that. There's two different pathways almost, and there's some people that just want any way out that they can get out as far as mentally goes. And then there's the physical aspect to it too, which I didn't realize was such a big number. People who were sick or who have cancers, things like that especially people that don't have good health care.
And lack of access to health care, and veterans that go to the VA. But a lot of the injuries that these boys sustain, all of which I think nobody's been able to, I believe, make it out of a combat zone unscathed psychologically. I think war opposes just our inherent human, almost on an inherent level, right?
Well, it is. It's how our DNA was made. We weren't created for this. We were created for relationship, not anti-relationship. Yeah.
And I just remember he left being a religious individual, and I'm more spiritual. We were raised in Catholic Irish family. Come over and have a glass of whiskey. It's a great time, let me tell you. But it's just like the epitome, a big family, loud, boisterous. And he left highly religious. I shouldn't say highly religious. He left as a practicing Catholic and returned as a very angry atheist. I have family members who are atheists. I have friends. I find it fascinating. I'm welcoming of all those things, but it was such a dramatic change, and it was fueled by so much anger at the foundation that it didn't feel like this kind of naturally progressing change of personality through physical experiences in the world or pursuit of other cultures and other religions. It was something fractured. He saw something, I believe, in the way that I explain people, he saw something that just went against the nature of humankind to such a degree. And my brother was a very sensitive person, tall, handsome, thin, physically fit, but sensitive in the terms of he felt very deeply. If one of our dogs died, I'd be crying. I loved him too. And Murphy would just encompass the pain. He felt so much. And when he came back, something was fractured. And where there was once hope, only anger resided. And he was very protective of his anger. He didn't want you to get too close to it. He didn't want you to expose it. And that anger really snowballed into self-destructive behaviors, social isolation, substance abuse. And what these men and women are thrown into, they're not prepared whatsoever about how to healthfully compartmentalize. Number two, I think that because he was a firefighter, paramedic, because that was his MOS, his military occupational specialty, he had sworn, very similar to me, to save people. My brother, if he ever had a weapon on his side, it was for self-defense. He was there to protect lives. He was there to bring back life. And you can only fail, and I can speak personally, you can only fail at that for so long until it saturates into every molecule of who you are. And why couldn't I have saved that little girl? Why couldn't it have been the drunk driver that died and not this child? Or why are my buddies coming back in pieces? The only thing, and I don't want to trigger anyone. The only thing that he really ever alluded to me was that he wasn't able to bring any of his boots home. And I thought, okay, dirty boots, there's some new boots. Okay. And it was because his job was to wash out the choppers. And there was so much blood coming out that it destroyed all of his footwear. And that's all he ever said. That's all he ever said. And so it's just nobody is prepared, nor do I think they ever could be for what they are to experience. But also, you're pulling these like good Midwestern kids out that grew up in a well-structured family, jumping on trampolines. These are not people who were prepared for this severe adversity. There's no criteria for enrollment here. It's like sign on the dotted line and we take everything from you. There's no preparation. There's absolutely definitely no post care for these people. We have failed tremendously. Look at our Vietnam veterans. The homeless population, when I did my speech during my bachelor's, I wrote on a homeless population, specifically Vietnam vets. And at that point in time, like 59% of our homeless population were Vietnam veterans. And so they go with these grandiose and wonderful ideas of being courageous, which they are, and they are heroes. And my brother is absolutely my hero. And then they come home and they don't get a hero welcome. They get, hey, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, get to work. Sorry, you don't have any skill sets, not our problem. And God forbid we're surprised when they feel, well, living isn't for me. Society's not for me. I can't make it here. And a lot of them end up going back just so they can feel some form of camaraderie.
Yeah. My husband went back as a contractor after he got out. So yeah, they just have that desire to just continue to be around other people. And
well, and it's even a well-known, that's part of the way that the retention officers are able to get such high retention numbers, because they'll tell them, you don't want to get out. Everybody I know that got out, unless you're working for a contractor and you got to stay for 20 years and this, but people talk about it. Whenever you get out, it's a train wreck. It's hard to do this. It's hard to do that. So that's why you stay in. That's part of why they tell them to do it. And it's true. I really like what you said too about middle America, these are kids that and they, especially even my husband, he was 24 when he deployed the first time. So that's young comparatively to what we are now. They're kid, which I feel comfortable saying this. Many of us didn't really learn too much about the world, but we had our own ideas, if you will. And once you go over there and you realize that we grew up knowing that there were parts of the world that there were people starving or this or that. But middle American kids who maybe got to travel to Florida once or twice, maybe if you're really super lucky, go to California, because it costs a lot of money to get these kids from middle America out to outside of their comfort zone, if you will. Brad Paisley even made a song about it. But there's plenty of kids in Oklahoma that never leave the state lines until, for whatever reason, they join the military. And you have this idea of what the world is, and then you fracture it in such a harsh way where, I know a lot of my husband's memories that he talks about that are the most important are seeing children that they had no shoes over there. And they were orphans, kids they didn't have any parents. Their parents had been killed. And there is no social groups over there, really, unless it's as far as it's some sort of ministry that's over there. But outside of that, there's not a lot of social programs to help the kids that are orphans. But there were kids as young as 3, 4, 5 years old in charge of taking care of themselves and didn't have any shoes. And it's 140 degrees and the sand is hot and their feet are burned, and that's how they live. And you take these kids that's a huge moral injury for some people because they don't know what to do with that. They weren't prepared for that. And then on top of it, they see their friends die and they see their friends come back with no limbs. And then the awful job that he had doing that day in and day out will take a toll on you. Washing out helicopters.
I think it was, I like you said, a moral injury. I think it's like, in the most poetic of sense, that's what it is, that it's like they fractured his soul. Like he could not comprehend that there is this much pain in the world. He could not comprehend that one man could turn against his brother and treat him that way. And I think it made him question on such a foundational level, if this is how the world really works, then this is not a world I want to live in. If there is, my brother and I both, and I don't know what dynamic it comes from, and I'm sure somewhere in there's some kind of childhood involvement, but my brother and I, and my friends tell me all the time, you got to stop worrying about justice, Liz. You're going to drive yourself crazy. You got to let go of wanting to hold people accountable. But Murphy and I both shared a very common interest, a very strong interest in the fact that if you do wrong, you pay for it. And if you're not sorry, then you're held accountable to the degree in which you made a mistake. And I think Murphy just saw so much unadulterated pain with no kind of outcome, with no kind of justice, with no accountability. And it fractured him to such a degree that he's like, this is the way the world operates, and this is the harshest of the pains, then everything just triangulates from this. And it changed his view on reality in totality. Everything changed. The way that he lived his life changed. The way that he loved the people in his life changed, because I really believe it was easier for him to live in anger and eventually be consumed by what I believe, and we have decided, and it's not a decision, but he was more than likely had bipolar disorder. And I will tell you that my brother did not show any signs and symptoms, at least clinically, prior to being deployed. But when he came back, there was absolutely bouts of depression and spouts of mania. And I think it was easier to live in that world. I think it was easier to go inside into this fractured sense of self than it was to make peace with the fact that we could do these atrocious things to one another and not be held accountable.
Well, and it's celebrated there. That's the thing that my husband says. He was like, I was tough in the Army, and I was, because he had so much passion. But you get outside of that, and then you're just some weird guy that's, really intense. And so that's the thing that he doesn't understand, why the civilians don't appreciate his passion. But there's a lot of civilians we don't have that same understanding. Well, I mean, most of us can't even find the place on a map. And at the end of the day, if you don't know anything about anything, then you don't know anything. So you can pretend all day long, but if you don't know, then you don't know. And the only way to know is to have these conversations, or to have gone, or to experience. It's the only way. You'll never get it really from even watching a movie. They're conversations you have to have. Those movies and things like that will give you a little window, a little bit of an idea, but that's really about it. It's all about having the discussions and realizing that this is real life, and it's not an idea. These aren't characters in stories. They're people's brothers and sisters and husbands and wives, daughters. So
having realistic expectations too for the kind of relationships we will have with these fractured individuals is, I think, imperative, because like you said, they come back a different person. And it's so hard for those of us that have been waiting, and I can speak on either side of this, obviously waiting for my brother to return, having that sibling rivalry and piggyback and pulling each other's hair and joking around. And I looked forward to having my brother back, but also on the side of being an ER nurse. And I was recently in a relationship to which I shared some vulnerabilities and some insecurities as far as what COVID is doing to a lot of us right now, and the burnout rate and the PTSD and the kind of lack. There's this whole frustration going on with what we see, but what we hear. And so it's been difficult. And to come to a partner, to come to a wife, a husband, a mother, a brother, and say, hey, I'm not okay. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to need a pass, and not a pass for it's almost like being aware enough of yourself, being introspective enough to say, I'm not okay. If you come home at 3 p.m. and there's a 6-pack of Coors on and I haven't done the dishes, remember who I am. Like, remember who loves you. Remember what I'm going through, and just know that I'm not late on a deadline at work. I didn't blow a tire on I-35. I am present in suffering and dying 12 hours a day, 3 to 4 days a week. and I'm telling you that I'm reaching my max and that I am not okay. And it's that communication, but also expecting, if you're with the right partner, which unfortunately I was not, but if you're with the right partner, for them to take that vulnerability as a gift and hold space for you with realistic expectations. And I'm sure that you guys can both relate. I might not get the husband back that I once had, and I know I didn't get the brother back that I once had, but what are realistic expectations for us moving forward? How do I show up for him, but still hold him accountable in his life? And how do we change this dynamic so that it works for both of us? And it's so difficult. It's so difficult because is it okay? Somebody drops a pickle jar at a grocery store and he's on the ground screaming and crying and people are, coming over and it's what level of normalcy am I willing to normalize and so that I can cope, so that I can be there for him, but also show up for me, because we're not going to get the person back that we said goodbye to.
Yeah. And I think it's important that they also know that, and that I don't know how to say it. We don't necessarily grieve the person that we lost, but I think they do too. But I think it's okay to admit that and to talk about it and to even normalize it for them. But to also have that accountability piece, because they can also bring it home too. And you have to teach them boundaries oftentimes, which can be hard, but it can also be done. So that's the positive there. I love this discussion. I don't like the topic at all, but I like the flow of it. I feel like it's really informational and people can grow through listening to it, because it's not things that are really often said, but they're important. And Libby and I both believe that this is the Holy Spirit it helps you through these times. This is part of the reason that Christ came, was to help us through these sufferings so that we don't have to suffer. And we believe that it's true. You can live a full life with mental illness, with traumatic brain injury, and because we're still here, we still have a purpose. And a lot of times we need help finding that and working through that. But if we are here, it's because God wants us here and we still have a purpose here. There's still a plan for us. It helps us move forward, but it's also true. So that's even, what do they call it? Like the cherry on the top. So what support did you have, or what would you like to see that would help families? That's a hard question to ask. And I didn't know if you meant that, Libby, whenever you wrote it, as before your brother passed away or after.
After, like, what support systems would you like to have in place for after?
Yeah, for families of the fallen.
Yeah.
What I've noticed is having a platform to tell their story. I accidentally came across social media and I was unaware that I had a fellow colleague of mine in high school that had committed suicide. And the only reason I saw it on social media was his family was organizing an event. And I was so excited to see that, because we're all collaborating for the same outcome, and devastated to see that they and I had shared the same pain. But I think it is so profound and it is so significantly overlooked, the positive kind of outcome that would be able to come from a family having a platform to tell their story. There's so much compounded grief and shame and pain. And with suicide, it's like, where do you put it? You're like balancing these plates on a pole, like in both hands, and there's nowhere to really place all of this. And suicide is such a specific burden to carry, because it comes with all of those that shame, the grief, the what ifs, the needing to make sense of it, the asking yourself why or how or what you could have done. So platforms are so crucial, because it gives us a place to just extract and set down our frustrations and our wounds and feel that we're making a difference in the life of somebody who could potentially go down the same path. And every time I feel that I have a conversation with somebody, especially my patients, and I can say this without sounding egotistical because I'm sure my buddies will listen to this eventually at work, but it's like Psych Whisperer Liz, like where is she? Because they're busy. They've got their hands full, right? This guy's maybe naked, running laps. That's all right. That's okay. This is things that we deal with. But to sit down and be able to humanize these people and to be patient and to say, hey, yes, let's give them a sense of control. I made a pact with myself that I would make an equal difference in my, I don't want to say normal life, but in the ER these days, it is a little abnormal, but in my out of hospital experience, as much as I do in my inter hospital experience, is just having a platform to say, hey, listen, you're not alone. This is what happened. We were a normal, right, family. We had medical professionals. We missed the signs and symptoms. I think that is absolutely, at least for me, been the most healing. Other tools in place. There's these beautiful people that volunteer their time and efforts for suicide, grief, and loss meetings where people just come together and mourn their loved ones. Like I said, and I made it multiple references, but caregivers on that home front have these restorative weekends for caregivers of veterans who are alive and struggling with suicidal ideations and attempts, but also caregivers who have lost their significant others. Art therapy, meditation, yoga, cycling, biking. There's so many things that are out there. The only thing that I must warn anyone is, unfortunately, they will not be delivered to your door. And unless you have a very good, stable advocate in your family, which I will tell you I tried to be, which affected my ability to mourn the loss of my brother. So I did pay the price on the other end of the scale, but you have to have somebody that's proactive. You have to have somebody that can say, all right, we're hurting. I get it, but we're getting up, we're showering, we're eating, and we're going to see a doctor. Or, hey, and never ever underplay the importance of just, hey, Susie, yeah, I know you're bummed out, but I'm actually coming over so you can open the door or I'll come through the window. All right. And we're going to have some ice cream and I'm going to take you down the street to this art showing, and just really forcing a new reality in on these families and letting them know that I'm here for you if you like it or not thing. Because I remember there was just months of where there were just these empty platitudes. I'm so sorry for your losses. I can't eat another damn casserole if you paid me to. And then you have your buddy come and she's just like, that's cool. Like, you can lock the door. Like, I'll break in. You think you're scrawny, Liz. I got you. Like, I'm taking you by the hair. We're going out in the sunshine. Just to have a powerful advocate behind your team as a family that says, no, we're doing this the right way. We're doing this the way that Murphy would have wanted us to take care of one another. We're doing this with integrity. We're taking care of one another the right way. And I think every family, God, I hope, has an advocate or a power source behind them. And if not, call me, because I will break into your house. I'm okay with that too. So no shame.
So how do we make our communities better understand and really realize, like, the population of not just the veterans, because you have the 22 suicides a day, but also the family members, the veteran caregivers. We had an episode with Sean Moore from Caregivers on the Home Front, and she talked about the high incidence of veteran suicidality and caregivers and suicidality. How do we help our communities understand this population better?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I remember talking to my therapist after my brother died, and he hit me with an alarming statistic that brought me to tears. And he said, Elizabeth, I want you to understand the gravity of your situation. And I'm like, yeah, buddy, I'm here. I'm pretty sure I got it. And he was like, no, I want you to understand the risk that your life is in. And he informed me at that point in time, and this was 2019, so I may be skewing the statistics a little bit, but 65% within the first year of losing an immediate family member or spouse to suicide, you are 65% more likely to attempt suicide. And I was talking to my family today. We buried my uncle. And so we were talking today, and I was excited to share with them my opportunity to discuss with you ladies what we are. And when I shared that statistic, my cousin, he was like, wow, like what? And I said, the only thing that I can think of that would push numbers like this, statistics like this, is that you have this person that was normalized in your life, who you loved, who you respected, who had the same favorite cereal as you, who was super extremely relatable, and they stepped through the door successfully. They left a situation that they decided they couldn't tolerate anymore, and they completed this act. Somebody you respected exited, left stage. And it makes it so much more tangible. It makes it so much more palpable and possible in this very kind of raw foundational level where you're like, well, I could just step in this door. It makes it so much more realistic, because prior to losing somebody to suicide, it's like, how do they even do it? It sounds so scary. And no, it's not. This is somebody I love. This is somebody who I spent my entire life with, who I knew and who knew me probably better than anyone else. And so it becomes so much more of a plausible outcome. And that is probably on a subconscious level more than we understand, but recognizing that if you have lost someone, you are in danger. You absolutely are in danger. And I don't say that to scare anyone by any means. I say it to say, welcome to the struggle. And you are not alone. And it is absolutely 65% more likely. Those numbers in the medical study, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's
huge. As far as statistics are concerned, it's a very real risk. And we need to tread very lightly. People need to understand that if somebody has committed suicide in your family or your friend group, or God forbid, your beloved, be very attentive to those in which that were closest to them. And you're going to do that anyways through the mourning and grieving process, but be very attentive. And we need to spread more awareness in terms of how much at risk these populations are. And I think this would be things like news specials, right? Speakers at veteran memorial services or walks or any kind of social event. It's not saying, hey guys, if you're suicidal, call this number and we're here for you. It's, hey, if you are a survivor of someone who's committed suicide, you are at risk. We are here for you. There is a community that is all about making sure that we show up for one another and mourn in the safest way possible, and probably the most conducive way possible. So it seems like I feel like I'm apologizing because it's such a repetitive answer, like awareness. You would think it would be easier than more complex, but people just need to give more opportunity for the platform regarding this conversation. And so that people understand, hey man, this year I've just got to be really introspective. And maybe that's avoiding alcohol. Maybe that's avoiding, alcohol's a depressant. Maybe that's saying no to the big social event that may be triggering, the concert that may have loud noises and smoke, the potentiality of going to a family event where an ex might be that could trigger you. And so you have to be very introspective and you have to protect your pain, because you're so vulnerable during that first year and then moving onward. That statistic really kept me up at night.
Yeah. And then I think enacting a safety plan is super important. We talk at Caregivers on the Home Front about enacting a safety plan during a crisis. I think that's really important. Having your people that you can contact and reach out to is so important as well.
Yes, very much. And we like to keep it very concise. One piece of paper, you have the telephone numbers of who to call as far as suicide hotlines, and then you have the contact numbers of those 3 people that you designate, or you have a signed agreement trying to hold them accountable, creating a new norm so that we can find our new normalcy, that if these don't work, a signed contract that you will call 911, that you will ask for help. And that definitely, I think, at least gives them an opportunity that if their blinders are on and they're feeling hopeless and we're in an alternate reality where we don't matter and we don't have inherent value, that maybe this would be enough of an accountability to see them through that darkness and move them in the right direction. So safety plans are very successful, and I see that professionally. So
we've seen that too. It's evidence-based.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much easier to have a plan rather than to wonder what you're going to do.
Yes, everybody knows where to be. It's like everybody what X to stand on, and it helps it be a lot more fluid.
So we're going to read a scripture, and this week it comes out of Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. And Libby picked this. It made me laugh whenever I picked it up because I was like, ooh, that's really true. But at the same token, it seems really like big, but really small at the same time. So it says, so don't worry about tomorrow, for today will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today.
that on a
'Cause
bumper
it's like,
sticker.
I don't know how I feel about that, but it's really true. And it's at the end, Christ is actually speaking, and this is the very last verse in this chapter. And if you go up a couple of verses, it's what I really like about this particular verse. It says, so don't worry about these things, saying, he's talking about how the flowers don't worry about what they're going to wear, and how the lilies don't worry about these things and how they're going to exist. And it says here, so don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers, but your heavenly Father already knows all your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. And then it goes into the last verse. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. And I think it's important, like up in verse 31, where I get really convicted sometimes, it says, don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? I think it's important to see that he's speaking plural there as far as a group goes. I think it is important that we, of course, know what you're going to eat, budget, things like that. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, if you notice a flock of birds never have a conversation of where they're going to go. They take off flying, and they have a natural order that comes with them. And it's just how it goes. And that's more of what he's speaking about. So he's saying that we don't have to argue amongst each other, that there already is the way. And for us, we learn that through reading the Bible and understanding Christ and understanding the Holy Spirit. I think it's important that you talked about discernment. Discernment is really important. That is something that I have found to be very true in my life. And it's also biblical as well. The Bible instructs us to have wise discernment, and we do that by praying, and we do that by reading scripture so that we can understand God's word for us. But that's where I thought it was cool that he speaks to us in the plural tense, but we can only control it by what we're doing on a single level. We can only control us and what we're doing. But if we all pour in and we're all doing the works of the Spirit, then we will be able to fly together as a community, which is important because birds and human beings were not created to live alone. We just weren't. We were created for relationship. So when somebody needs help, relationship is going to be hard for them. They're going to struggle. Whenever you have diagnosis like bipolar disorder, you're going to have those. And my husband has that. That's how I can understand what you're saying. But you're going to have days of mania. And it's not about the guilt or shame of having a personality disorder. It's about being able to understand what makes that high a high and what makes that low a low, and to get an understanding of a level playing field, something that's a little bit less extreme, and finding ways to do that. It can get hard, though. It definitely can, but there's enough trouble for today, so we don't need to worry about tomorrow.
I think it's important the way that you brought up shame. And when I heard about that, what I thought is we all have trauma, veteran, non-veteran, first responder, non-first responder. And it's so surprising to me that we lose sight so quickly. I think it's natural human instinct to point a finger. But the reality of the situation is we all said, hey, if you got like that special pill, like anti-mental illness, like over here, throw it into the crowd, I'll grab one. But at the end of the day, we're all suffering from something. And the majority of the origin of what we're suffering from, we didn't ask for. If it either be childhood trauma, if it be we signed on the dotted line to serve our country and went over and had to make some really difficult decisions. A lot of what trauma spurs from or grows from is never a conscious decision to be a disoriented or dysfunctional person. It most of the time is something that happens externally. It's an external experience that alters the way in which we view ourselves in the world that we live in. And that is going to be something moving forward that I really want to drive home, and that I'd really be committed to continuing working with Sean and caregivers on the home front, is not allowing shame to be the vehicle that we drive either ourselves or the way that we view others. And so I'm really glad that you brought up shame, because I believe it can be the absolute most detrimental of all human emotion, because the difference between shame and guilt, and Brene Brown, she's great, I'm sure we all love her, but guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am wrong. And I bet you if you sat and asked the majority of our veterans which one I could almost guarantee the majority of them feel that they are inherently wrong, that they are inherently flawed. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Well, and we are inherently flawed by sin. Humanity is. And I think we have this expectation sometimes that we're not, because we've worked so hard to not be, especially whenever you come from a religious background. You work very hard to be as sinless as you can, not realizing that's not something that you can even do. But it's good news, because Christ didn't call us to be sinless. That's what's the beauty in it. He does say, take up your cross and follow me. So there is accountability in there. He doesn't say just, hey, be all willy-nilly, nothing matters. Christ has some of the harshest words for sin out of anybody that's quoted in the Bible. And he makes it very clear how to get around it. But it's all through relationship. It's all through dialogue. It's all through the right way to have accountability. But it's all in those books in the Bible. They were put together for that reason. And it's just beautiful to be able to see it all come to fruition, though. But there are going to be troubles. There are going to be hard times. But man, one day there won't be. We'll soon be done with these troubles and trials.
Got enough for today. Let's focus on that.
No doubt.
Thank you for sharing your brother's story. And I think it's important that you've shared not just your professional experience, but your personal tragedy as well, because he's really important. And we're very thankful for his service. And I'm sorry, it made me cry. I'm sorry that your family had to pay for it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for honoring him. That means a lot to me.
Thanks again for listening to Behind the Service podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, leave us a review. It helps more people like you find this podcast. Remember, subscribe. We'll talk to you next week. Bye.